Hey, Dr. D. Before I get started, I just want to say I am at home alone tonight, and so as I'm making this video, I'm just going to do kind of a one-sided conversation with John, the client. Um, in an ideal frame, I'd like to have somebody else acting as the client, but I think because of circumstances being as they are, I'm just going to go ahead and pretend like he's in front of me and do my little monologue. But at different points where I pause, obviously I would give him a longer amount of time to speak or to respond as necessary. So you can just bear that in mind as you're watching. Hi, John. I'm really glad to see you again today. How have you been these last couple days? Okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. That would be really rough. All right. Well, yeah, you had your intake interview and we had that first session. And then the last time you came, I gave you all those questions and you took those assessments. So today, as you come back, we're going to look at what those assessments were for and what your results could show us about how I can help you and how you can move forward. Some of the different choices you have, or possible changes you can make, or maybe things that will remain the same. We'll see. So let me first start, before I give you results and explanation, by just asking, when you took all of those test questions or those test items and you considered them and you had that experience of taking the test, how did you feel? Okay, so you're saying that a couple of the test questions were a little unclear to you and you just kind of tried to interpret them the best you could? Yeah, I know I did tell you that you could ask me if you had questions, but you just seem very determined to go on and do it, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. So I'll just take whatever interpretation you had for them, but if we need to look at those items later and talk about them when we look at the item list, we can do that, because I want to respect your feelings. So thank you for sharing with me about how you felt during that time, and I'll take that into account as we're talking about this today. So first, what I'd like to do is just tell you briefly about those different test parts, and then I'd like to tell you about your personal results in those test sections and what that says to me as your helper, but also what I think it could mean for you. More importantly, though, I want to hear what you think about some of the things that I'm sharing with you. And as we make a plan moving forward, how we can work together and be in cooperation about that. That's my main goal for today. So I hope that this process will go well with you. And, if at any point you have any questions or you're unsure about something I've said, please ask me, because I'll try to speak in words that are non-counselorese, if I can say that. So the assessments that you took the other day, there were a big long string of different questions and items you looked at, and they were actually a part of 4 different tests that focus on different things within a wider scale. And so I had you take the BDI-2 and the BHS and the BAI. Those are all commonly given, but depending on what kind of answers a person gives, I may also give what's called the BSI or the BSS. And I gave that to you based on some of your answers from the other assessment parts. So the BDI-2 is focusing primarily on depression and how much depression may be affecting you. It's a very highly respected tool and it's been widely used for a long time. The BHS, that H stands for hopelessness, and it's helping me to check for feelings about things related to the future and expectations, motivation, all that sort of thing. Then the third part, the BAI, that was helping me to check for the presence of anxiety specifically, as it's separate from depression, because sometimes those two go hand in hand, but sometimes people really only struggle with one or the other, or maybe neither at all. Sometimes it can fluctuate. The last one, the BSS, or sometimes called the BSI, that's the one I went ahead and gave you after that, because from your answers I could see that there was a possibility, a suggestion maybe of some thoughts of suicide. And so I just wanted to double check that and rule out if some of the other things you were feeling were causing you to think about that. So that's the reason why I gave you that last part. So I want to thank you again for taking the time to go through all that, because I think your results, as we'll see, they were very fruitful to me. And I think it'll help us a lot moving forward. I hope that you'll feel the same way, but of course, that's open to discussion. So as we go along and talking about these different parts, then, and I show you some scores, I want you to remember that when the test results come back and as they are ranked, then as your results show up, these things can be ranked from minimal to mild to moderate to severe. So when we look at your results, I want you to bear those kind of 4 ranks or 4 levels in mind. When you hear these terms, severe, moderate, I just want you to know that that's a scale that helps me to understand from these test results where you rank in comparison to other people who would take the test, and then just in questions of how seriously I may need to take a concern about this thing or that thing. Of course, everything about you and your health is very important to me and your well-being. But when I see these labels, I'm not thinking, oh, red light, mayday, like this person is a lost cause or something like that. It's not like that. It just helps me to kind of place you in comparison to the wider population, and then gives me an idea of how much emphasis I may need to put on this area or this area when I'm working with you. But I do want to ask you, as we go along, just be thinking about this. I'll come back to this question again. When we talk about these things, what does it mean to you? So if I use words like minimal, mild, moderate, severe, what does that mean to you? Okay. So now I know what you're thinking about those things, and we can bear that in mind as we keep talking. And I just want you to know that I was not alarmed by your results. I'm not upset in any way. I'm really glad that you came to see me again. I'm very glad you came to see me, and I'm glad that we use these assessments. So I hope as we go over these results, you'll know that I'm very encouraged to see what they showed, and hope that what they showed may help us again in helping you. I want to tell you again some of the things that I think that these results mean, but what you think about it and what it means to you is equally important to me. I can't really stress that enough. So here's a chart showing your results summary. So if we look here, you can see we have for the BDI-2, remember that's the one that has to do more with depression. That was your highest ranking, and you ranked in the severe level. Now, the good news with all of these is that you were not in the highest severity or ranking level. So these were a little bit lower than what would be considered the highest level, but you were quite high here. So that ranked you as severe for depression. BHS, that's that hopelessness one again, you ranked as moderate. And then the BAI, remember that's the one that has to do more with anxiety apart from depression, you also ranked as moderate. So we'll come to your BSS or BSI in just a moment. But you can see that all of these are pretty high, with the BDI, the depression one, being the highest. Before we go on, do you have any questions about this? Okay. There's another way of looking at it. This handy little chart kind of shows a comparison, and this has to do with percentiles. So comparing you to the broader population, other people that might take this test. And you can see here in kind of a graduated level that the depression again was the highest, the hopelessness was lower, and the anxiety even a little bit lower than the hopelessness. But again, all of these are well above that middle range that might be more average or more common. Now, once again, when you look at this, I want you to know that these are just numbers. What's more important is the thoughts and the feelings and the choices behind them. So as we talk a little bit more about the nitty-gritty of this, I just want you to bear this in mind. This is kind of the clinical idea of what I'm seeing, but let's talk about what this really looks like when we get down to it, okay? Let me look at my notes real quick. When we look at this, then you might just think, looking at those levels, that it means your chance of having depression or your seriousness of a struggle with depression is very severe, as where hopelessness and anxiety are also moderate, but they're not quite as high, but they're still there. This is really something to consider. Before we go on, again, I want to ask you, when you think of those terms like depression and anxiety and hopelessness, what do you think of? How would you define those things? I know in your first session, in your entrance interview, we talked a little bit about some various factors in your life, but we didn't really go into much depth. So I just want to ask you, when you think about your own life, have you ever thought of yourself as being a depressed person or an anxious person or a hopeless person before? Okay. That's fine. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate, again, your honesty and your transparency. So as we move forward, I went ahead and I gave you the BSS or the BSI because you marked a certain statement on the BDI-2, and that was, I would kill myself if I had the chance. Now, I was kind of curious because if I take a moment here and I just show you a rehash of some of the items you marked. You start down here, we have these items right here, and then we also have a whole list that were down here. Now, what I think is really interesting is you had marked, I would kill myself if I had the chance, as being true. But then there were other ones that you had marked later when I gave you that BSS, BSI assessment, where you were saying, like, I have a moderate to strong wish to live. I have a weak wish to die. My reasons for living or dying are about equal. And I have no desire to kill myself. So I found it a little contradictory, the difference between I would kill myself if I had the chance versus I have no desire to kill myself. So can you tell me, when you read that phrase, I have no desire to kill myself, can you explain to me, what were you thinking when you marked true for that item? Certainly, I don't want you to feel like you're pinned into a corner. It's just that in our field, we take any thoughts about taking our own life very, very, very seriously. So it's really important for me to clarify with you, to this point, you've never had any serious thoughts of actually taking your own life? Okay? Yeah, and so you're saying you've never made any kind of plan then for trying to end your life? Okay. I'm really happy to hear that. I mean, it's great. I hope that you'll know that if you ever have that while you're working with me especially, I hope you'll let me know that, because I want to help you in that situation as much as I can. We take that very, very seriously, and your life is very important. We want you to be able to be open about talking about your feelings, your thoughts in that degree, or in that vein. So it's just interesting that there were other items that you'd marked on here, and maybe were these a couple of the ones that you were talking about that seemed unclear to you? Can you show me? Here's the paper again. Can you show me? Do you remember these items? Do you remember which ones were most unclear to you when you were reading them? Okay, yeah. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, we can talk more about those items if you want. I think what that I'm referring to is actually this. I understand how when you read it, you took it to mean that, but I think in our clinical way of thinking, it actually means this. Yeah. Okay. So that kind of sets me at ease just a little bit more. I also found it's really interesting down here on the BDI-2, the same, that you talked about how you're getting more tired and fatigued more easily than usual, and that you're more irritable than usual, but you still feel like you have the same amount of energy, and you haven't experienced any change in your sleeping pattern, and you haven't experienced any change in your appetite or in your interest in sex. Okay, so can you put your finger on it all? any time when you felt more of that tiredness, that fatigue, or that irritability coming on? I do remember in that first meeting you had mentioned something about your current supervisor at work. Yeah. So you're saying you noticed something very marked around the time that that supervisor came on board with you. Okay. That's good to know. We'll come back to that in a minute then. I'm glad that you clarified that. Um, Going back to my notes really quick then, when we go back to that phrase, just want to revisit that because that is a key one in helping me understand then maybe how to better interpret your results for the depression and the anxiety as well. So I would kill myself if I had the chance. So when you say that, are you saying that you've thought sometimes about killing yourself? No, you told me you hadn't thought about killing yourself. If you ever thought about killing yourself, do you just not see yourself as having the chance? Okay. So I hear you saying the word trapped several times. All right. And do you feel like you're in limbo? Okay. Yeah. I could see that in several of your responses, even in the items and what you responded to here. Yeah. If you look here, I never get what I want, so it's foolish to want anything. And I can't imagine what my life would be like in 10 years. These were just a couple of the examples. I saw a number of these. There were a number on the, yeah, up here we also had, I've lost most of my interest in other people or things. So kind of this idea that you're just sort of in limbo, not really wanting to do anything, but not feeling like you can do anything to get out of that. Yeah? Okay. So, if I can just ask you, when you look back on your younger years, where did you expect to be at 30? Did you have any dreams for where you wanted to be by the time you were at this age? It sounds like it turned out a lot different than you dreamed. It happens to a lot of people. I know it certainly happened to me, but yeah, it doesn't make it any easier sometimes. So, what makes you feel trapped in life? Would you say it's more your work or your family life or a combination or something else? Okay, we come back to that supervisor again and your current manager position and your limited education. Okay, so I think I hear you saying mainly work. Yeah. I'm really glad that you could share that and we could kind of put our finger on something because I think that's a great start. True, it looks like we have a very high level of depression from this assessment and a moderate level of anxiety and hopelessness. But even though that's something that we've been able to pinpoint as being possible, it doesn't mean that you have to stay there. And even though you feel stuck, primarily at work, it also means that you don't have to stay there. So if you're open to discussing this, a plan for working together on this aspect of your life especially, in addition to the things that are going on with the depression, the anxiety, I would really love to work with you in the coming weeks. And I would love to explore both kind of the roots of what's behind that depression, the anxiety, the hopelessness, and those different aspects. But also, as they're connected with work, how would you feel about doing some kind of career counseling assessments on the side and exploring possibilities for how you might actively move past feeling trapped, whether that be with some changes in how you deal with things at work or even possible changes for the future that you could indeed try. You dip your head and you're kind of shaking it, but when your face comes back up, I see that light. I see that spark of light in your eyes. It certainly wasn't there when you came in the last couple times, but that makes me happy. do you feel about that? Yeah, I'd like to try with you too. I'm glad you came back, John. I really look forward to working with you in the next weeks and months, and we'll see what kind of progress we can make to help you get past feeling trapped so that you're not stuck in that rut anymore, okay?